The email arrived at 12:01 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'm a light sleeper, and my phone was on the nightstand and the notification lit up the ceiling and I reached for it the way you reach for your phone at midnight, when something arrives with the specific dread of a person who knows that nothing good comes at that hour. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark for a while staring at the ceiling, doing the math. My name is Robert Okafor. I am a CPA. I have lived on Maple Drive in the Sycamore Glen community for 11 years, long enough to have watched the neighborhood go through 2 HOA presidents before Karen and to have developed through that experience a fairly calibrated sense of what functional community governance looks like versus what it looks like when someone has confused the position with the person. I live quietly, I maintain my lawn, I pay my dues on time. I once received a $200 fine for excessive holiday lighting, which I paid without contest because I had better things to do that December, and which I have thought about exactly once since then, the night 3 months ago when I opened the HOA financial statements and started reading. The email that arrived at 12:01 was from Karen, subject line, important community update, dues adjustment effective immediately. The body of it was 4 sentences. HOA dues were increasing by 312% effective immediately. Non-payment would result in liens within 7 days. The increase reflected necessary operational adjustments. Compliance was required. No vote, no meeting, no 30-day notice, no itemized justification, no acknowledgement that a 312% increase imposed overnight on 47 households might constitute the kind of decision that required, at minimum, a conversation. I put the phone down and lay in the dark, and I thought about the financial statements I had been working through for 3 months. I thought about the landscaping contract and the security company and the administrative reimbursements and the emergency roof repairs billed in July during a drought, so severe the county had issued water restriction notices. I thought about the vendor registrations I had pulled from the state business database. I thought about the account name on the third-party payment records and the way it partially matched a name I recognized, and I thought, she just made a mistake. Not because she sent the email was brazen and probably legally problematic on its own, but because the email was the kind of move that only makes sense if you believe the people on the receiving end will absorb it and comply. She had miscalculated what 47 people who had spent 3 months quietly watching and documenting were prepared to do at 12:01 in the morning when pushed hard enough. I got up. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I started writing. Let me go back to the beginning because the midnight email didn't come from nowhere, and the 3 months of work that preceded it are the reason it ended the way it ended. I had lived in Sycamore Glen for 11 years, and for most of those 11 years, the HOA had been the kind of background institution that you interact with minimally and regard the way you regard the water company. You know it exists. You pay what it asks, you call when something is broken. The 2 presidents before Karen had been unremarkable in the best possible way. They organized the annual picnic. They managed the landscaping contract. They sent the quarterly newsletter with the reminder about trash bin placement and the update on the pool hours. Nobody loved them and nobody hated them, and the community functioned with the low-drama reliability of a place where the people in charge understand that their job is maintenance, not theater. Karen had been president for 2 years when I started paying attention. The attention was gradual at first. A landscaping contract that seemed, when I looked at the number in the newsletter, higher than it should be for the scope of work I was observing. A security company I didn't recognize that had appeared in the budget without explanation. The administrative reimbursement line item that grew each quarter without corresponding documentation in the meeting minutes. These were not alarms, not individually. They were the kind of numbers that a person with my professional background notices and files away. The way a doctor notices a slightly elevated number in a routine test, not cause for panic, but cause for continued observation. Then came the board meeting 3 months before the midnight email. It was the quarterly meeting, the routine one, the kind that usually ran 45 minutes and covered lawn maintenance schedules and pool closure dates and whether the speed bump near the entrance needed resurfacing. About a dozen homeowners showed up, which was more than usual because word had gotten around that a few people had questions about the budget. I was one of them. So was Diane Kowalski, a retired paralegal who lived on the east side of the development and who had a professional habit of reading governing documents with the careful attention of someone who had spent 30 years understanding what language in official paperwork actually meant versus what it appeared to mean. So was Marcus Webb, who ran a small contracting business and had looked at the emergency repairs line item with the eye of someone who knew what repairs cost and what they didn't. The questions were reasonable and specific. Where was the competitive bid documentation for the landscaping contract? What was the selection process for the security company? Could the board provide itemized receipts for the administrative reimbursements? These were not accusations. They were the questions that any competent board should be able to answer without difficulty, the questions that exist precisely so that the people paying dues can verify that their money is going where the budget says it's going. Karen's response was controlled and brief. She said the board's financial management was sound and transparent. She said the vendors had been selected through a thorough process. She said the administrative reimbursements reflected legitimate operational costs. She said concerns could be submitted in writing to the board for review. She did not answer any of the specific questions. She smiled the whole time. The specific smile of a person who has decided that the performance of patients is more effective than actual engagement, and who is also, I noted, sitting very still in the way that people sit still when they are working hard to appear relaxed. I went home that evening, and I requested the full financial statements for the preceding 2 years. This was my right as a dues-paying member under the HOA's own bylaws, which required the board to make financial records available to homeowners upon written request within 14 business days. Karen sent them 22 days later, after a follow-up email from me citing the specific bylaw and the response deadline. I noted the delay. I added it to the file I had started keeping. Then I started reading. I want to describe what 3 months of forensic review looks like, not because the technical details are interesting to most people, but because the work is what made everything else possible, and I want to be precise about it. I was not looking for something specific. I was reading the way you read any set of financial records when you've been given reason to question them systematically, line by line, forward and backward, cross-referencing every vendor against public records, every payment against the supporting documentation, every approval against the meeting minutes that should have authorized it. The landscaping contract was the first thing that resolved clearly. The annual amount was $47,000 for a community of 47 homes with a total common area of approximately 2 acres. I had managed the books for commercial properties. I had done pro bono work for community organizations. I knew what landscaping cost. I pulled the state business registration for the vendor. The registered agent's name was not Karen's. It was a surname I didn't recognize. But the registered address was a residential address in a zip code 20 minutes from Sycamore Glen, and when I searched that address in the county property records, the owner of record was a person with Karen's maiden name. Not Karen, a relative. The relationship was not stated in any public document, but the address, the maiden name, and the $47,000 annual contract formed a picture that had a shape to it. The security company was simpler. The vendor registration listed the owner directly. It was Karen's cousin. I found this in about 20 minutes using public state business filings. The HOA had been paying this company $1,800 a month for monitoring services. I could find no record of a competitive bid process, no board vote authorizing the selection, nothing in the meeting minutes that acknowledged the relationship between the vendor and the president. The emergency roof repairs were the most straightforward of all, in a specific way that I found almost impressive in its audacity. The repairs had been billed in July, $12,000, labeled Emergency Structural Maintenance, approved under the President's Emergency Expenditure Authority, which the bylaws defined as available for genuine emergencies requiring immediate action before a board vote could be convened. I pulled the county weather records for July. There had been no rain event, no wind event, no hail, nothing that would produce roof damage requiring emergency repair. The drought conditions I remembered had been confirmed and documented by the county. I called the roofing company listed on the invoice. The number had been disconnected. I searched the state business registry. The company had been registered 6 months before the invoice and dissolved 4 months after it. One transaction in its operational history, as far as I could determine from public records, $12,000 from Sycamore Glen HOA. By the end of the 3 months, I had a 12-page summary. Transaction timelines, vendor overlap documentation, payment approvals with timestamps, one of them digitally signed at 2:13 in the morning, which is a time of day that legitimate board business is not typically conducted. The full picture, sourced entirely from public records, and the financial documents Karen had been legally required to provide, organized chronologically and cross-referenced. I had not shared it with anyone yet. I was waiting for the right moment, or rather, I was waiting to be certain, because certainty is different from suspicion, and I was not going to put 12 pages of analysis in front of 47 families until I was certain. Then the midnight email arrived, and Karen provided the moment herself. By 8 in the morning, the neighborhood Facebook group was doing what neighborhood Facebook groups do when 47 people wake up to the same alarming message. It was loud and scared, and in several cases desperate in the specific way that financial fear is desperate, which is quiet and personal and worse than anger. I saw the post from the single mother on Birchwood who was calculating whether groceries or HOA came first. I saw the post from the retired couple on the North End who were on fixed income and for whom 312% was not an abstraction but a specific monthly number that had somewhere to come from or didn't. I saw the post from Marcus Webb, who was furious in the controlled way of a person who has been watching something build for a long time and has finally seen it arrive. I posted one sentence in the group: "I have something relevant to share. Please check your email." I had drafted the email while the coffee was brewing. I addressed it to all 47 homeowners. Subject line: "We will not be paying." I wrote one paragraph explaining that the 312% increase had been imposed without the statutory notice required under state law, that it had not been authorized by a proper board vote, and that non-compliance with liens threatened under these conditions would be legally contestable. Then I said I had attached something they needed to see. The attachment was the 12-page audit summary. Every transaction, every vendor, cross-reference, every timestamp, every public record citation, organized, sourced, specific. 47 homeowners opened that email. 47 people signed the response. I want to be honest about what happened when I read the 47 signatures at the bottom of the reply thread. I am not a person who is easily moved by things. I have spent my professional life with numbers, which are not emotional objects, and I have developed the habit of treating situations analytically rather than personally. But I sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the afternoon looking at those 47 names, the retired couple on the North End, the single mother on Birchwood, Marcus Webb, Diane Kowalski, people I had nodded to for years over fences and in the parking lot of the grocery store and at the annual picnic, and I felt something that I do not have a precise professional term for, which was the specific weight of 47 people deciding together that something was going to stop. Karen's response came 40 minutes later. She forwarded the email to the HOA attorney with one line: "Prepare liens. All of them." Then she opened the attachment. I know the timeline of what happened next from the Facebook group, which I was watching in real time. At 9:03, she posted nothing. The group had been going for hours without her participation, which was unusual. At 9:11, someone who lived 2 houses from Karen posted that Karen's car was in her driveway and her lights were on. At 9:16, the screenshots started appearing: vendor registration records, the state business filing with the maiden name address, a photograph of the dissolved roofing company's registration document. Not from me, from other homeowners who had, apparently, been doing their own research alongside mine without my knowing. The comments were not panicked anymore. They had a different quality, the quality of people who have found solid ground under their feet and are figuring out what to do next now that they're standing on it. At 10 p.m. 47 people posted the same sentence in the Facebook group at the same time. We had coordinated it in a separate message thread. "See you at the emergency meeting." Diane Kowalski had filed the formal complaint with the State Regulatory Division 3 days earlier, before the midnight email, because she had read the audit summary and then read the state HOA statute and identified, with the precision of a retired paralegal who had spent 30 years with legal documents, the specific provision that the 312% increase violated. The statutory notice requirement was not ambiguous. Written notice to all homeowners minimum 30 days prior to any dues increase exceeding 15%. Karen had sent an email at midnight announcing a 312% increase effective immediately. The violation was categorical. The emergency meeting threshold under our governing documents was 25% of homeowner signatures. We had 62% by the morning after the midnight email. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Karen arrived early, navy blazer, pearls, bylaws printed and stacked in front of her like a fortification. She had, I noticed, also brought the HOA attorney, a man named Gerald, who sat to her left with a legal pad and the expression of someone who has been told a version of events and is beginning to suspect the version was incomplete. I had seen that expression professionally. It was the expression of an attorney recalibrating in real time. The room was standing. People had brought chairs from home. The folding chairs along the walls were full, and there were people standing 3 deep along the back wall, which in a clubhouse designed for community potlucks created a specific kind of density that changed the temperature of the room before anyone said a word. I went first because we had agreed I would go first. I had the slides prepared, transaction timelines, vendor overlaps, the 2:13 a.m., digital signature, the security footage logs showing the emergency repairs crew had never been on site during the billing period. I had pulled the footage through a public records request to the company that monitored the development's entrance cameras, and the logs showed no commercial vehicle matching the roofing company's description on the dates the work was allegedly performed. I went through the slides at the pace of a person presenting findings to a professional audience, which is to say without drama and without pausing for reaction, because the information was the argument and the information did not need help. Karen tried to interrupt twice, out of order. Meeting not properly convened, I held up the governing documents both times. Emergency session threshold 25%. We had 62. Both times she stopped. When I finished, Diane stood. She described the state complaint she had filed. She read the statutory notice requirement aloud. She read Karen's midnight email aloud. She placed them side by side verbally and let the room do the comparison. Then she sat down. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when a large number of people are absorbing something simultaneously. Karen said, "You're twisting this. This is harassment." Someone in the back said quietly enough to be measured and loudly enough to carry, "No, this is accountability." Then the treasurer stood. His name was Phil Garrett. He had been HOA treasurer for 4 years, a retired bank examiner who had taken the position because he believed in the community and had the relevant skills, and had thought initially that the board was functional. He looked at the room when he stood, not at Karen. His voice had a slight tremor in it that was not fear. I had heard that particular voice quality before in clients who had been carrying something uncomfortable for a long time and were finally in a room where they could put it down. He said, "I tried to stop this." The clubhouse went completely still. He described the sequence, his refusal to sign off on the 312% increase when Karen presented it 3 weeks earlier. His questions about the vendor contracts, his requests for competitive bid documentation, his suggestion that the administrative reimbursements required itemized receipts before he could approve them. He described how 2 weeks ago his access to the HOA financial management software had been revoked, and how Karen had told him it was a software transition issue and how he had known immediately that it was not. He described consulting an attorney quietly, on his own, the week after his access was revoked. He described what the attorney had told him about his personal liability exposure as treasurer if the financial irregularities I had documented were confirmed. Then he placed a document on the table, a resignation letter. Karen's unsigned, undated, but drafted. He had found it in the shared board documents folder 3 days earlier, which suggested Karen had considered this possibility before the midnight email, had drafted a prepared exit, and had then decided instead to send the 312% increase and attempt to force compliance before the situation reached this point. Karen looked at the document on the table. She looked at it for a long moment and said nothing. The recall petition had 71% of homeowner signatures by the time the vote was called. The hands went up. They were counted once by Phil and once by Marcus Webb, and the 2 counts matched. The result was read aloud by Phil, whose voice had steadied by this point, who looked at the room rather than at Karen when he read the numbers. Removal effective immediately. Full financial review to be initiated within 5 business days. Independent audit to be commissioned. All pending lien actions suspended pending review. Karen stood very still while the numbers were read. She did not speak. She gathered her printed bylaws and her clipboard, and she walked out of the clubhouse, and the door closed behind her, and the room held its silence for about 10 seconds, and then everyone started talking at once. The state inquiry confirmed the self-dealing findings within 6 weeks. Civil penalties were issued. A repayment order followed, covering the amounts the audit identified as improperly authorized, which totaled, across the landscaping contract overpayments, the security company fees, the emergency repairs fraud, and the administrative reimbursements, an amount that the 47 homeowners of Sycamore Glen had paid over 2 years in good faith to a fund they believed was maintaining their community. The recovered funds were significant enough that the newly constituted board, Phil as interim president, Diane as interim secretary, a reconstituted committee of 5 homeowners, including Marcus Webb, was able to approve a temporary dues reduction for the following 2 quarters, while the permanent budget was restructured with verified vendor contracts and competitive bid requirements, and a financial review process that required 2-signature approval for any expenditure above $500. The 47 homeowners Karen had tried to intimidate at midnight approved that dues reduction unanimously. Karen's house went on the market 11 weeks after the meeting. No farewell post in the Facebook group, no final email, no goodbye at all, just a for sale sign one morning where her car had been. And then the car was gone too, and then the sign was gone. And then a young couple moved in who knew nothing about any of it, and who I introduced myself to over the fence one Saturday afternoon, and who seemed like perfectly decent people who just wanted to live somewhere quietly, which is all any of us wanted, the whole time. That was the whole ask. I still have the 12-page summary in a folder on my desktop. Not because I need it anymore. The state inquiry is closed. The repayment order is fulfilled. The new board has been operating transparently for 7 months and has not given anyone reason to question it. I keep it because of what it represents, which is 3 months of work done on a kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night by a person who was angry about a $200 holiday lighting fine, and who decided, when the financial statements arrived 22 days late, to read them carefully. Most people don't read them carefully. Most people trust that the number in the newsletter is the right number, and that the vendor in the budget is there for the right reasons, and that the person with the clipboard and the title is operating in good faith. That trust is reasonable. It should be honored. When it isn't, sometimes the only answer is someone who knows how to read the statements and is willing to spend 3 months doing it. On a Thursday evening in early spring, 7 months after the midnight email, the new board held the annual community meeting. It ran 45 minutes. Phil covered the budget, line by line, with the vendor documentation attached. Diane covered the governing document updates. Marcus covered the maintenance schedule for the common areas. There were questions. They were answered with documents. After the meeting, people stood around for a while with coffee and cookies that someone had brought, the way people stand around after a thing that went the way it was supposed to go. I talked to the retired couple from the North End, who looked, I thought, like people who had been carrying something for a while and had recently been allowed to set it down. I talked to the single mother from Birchwood, whose name was Tamara, and who had 3 kids in the elementary school down the road, and who told me that the dues reduction had meant, in practical terms, a month of groceries. I told her I was glad. She said thank you, and she said it in the way that people mean it when they mean more than the words, and I said you're welcome in the same way. I drove home on streets that were quiet and well-lit and ordinary, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table. The 12-page summary was on my desktop, filed where I could find it. The holiday lights were in a box in the garage waiting for December, and I was going to put up exactly as many as I wanted to put up. That's the whole story.